Good morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock. I'm Vern Tepe, Chair of the Public Service Committee, and I hereby call the meeting to order. May we have a roll call, please?
Brown,
Brown here.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Lewis,
Who's here?
Shepro, Surges, Copey,
He's online.
Tepe.
Tepe here. Right, thank you. May I have a unanimous motion to approve the minutes of April 21, 22?
So moved.
Any objection? Okay, motion is passed. Okay, do we have any public comments this morning? I see nobody online. Okay, we will go past that. Finance Department, the financial reports are attached. Any comments, questions? Okay. Recorder's Department. Here, I signed the document for them this morning. They said that people are still buying houses, so they're still over there working. Okay, the treasurer's report.
Good morning, Maria Herrera, for the treasurer. We have a report on file. I just wanted to report that our collection, we're a little bit ahead of last year. The public is coming in, as we can all see, and we remind them that the due date is June 1st. After June 1st, there is penalty of 1.5%. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Question.
Yes, sir, Mr.
I saw in this morning's Herald, there's a sticker from the treasurer's office saying, don't forget Kane County real estate taxes due June 1st. And I wondered how much that cost.
I will have to look that up for you. I don't have it out the top of my head.
Yeah, I'd appreciate a follow-up to that if you,
People do read that.
they do, but I'm just wondering why we're paying to put this on here when we get 1.5% if they're late.
That's the end of it.
That's the end of it.
Perhaps it was only on your paper, but we'll see. Supervisor of Assessments, Mark, glad to see you here. I hope you're well.
I am much better. Thank you very much. Fully recovered. So we have my report starting on page 31. As is usual, the timing of submission of reports means that more has happened since then, so you'll want to make these edits. Hampshire Township certified its assessment roll on May 17th. Dundee Township certified its assessment roll on May 16th. Processing is going well. All townships have reported that they will be in by the statutory deadline of June 15th. And probably the biggest thing to say about that is it's becoming the new normal that we get them in on time. That seems like, why would that be normal? When I took office 15 years ago, I think the last township that certified didn't certify until December. And we've made quite a bit of work in getting everything done early so we can get everything out timely. So next year, the treasurer will be on time. The tax cycle generally runs about 20 months from start to finish. So we're processing multiple years at the same time with tax bills just coming out. We get our first wave of certificates of error. Certificate of error is simply a legal term meaning a tax bill is being corrected. The treasurer has graciously afforded me a note that was in all your tax bills. I'm sure you read the note because you read everything the government sends you. One side's from the treasurer, one side's from me. But one of the things I encourage people to do is check your homestead exemptions. If you don't have one that you're entitled to, call us. We can get that on by October 1st. There is a deadline to when we can't fix it anymore. So we do get a lot of people calling right when tax bills come out. We'll get our next boomlet of calls right around the time the first installment is due, because some people open it up and immediately act. Other people will open it up and they will act as soon as that first deadline comes in. The treasurer's office will experience the same thing. They have a lot of people coming in right at the 1st of May, then at the end of May. Then the next boom will come at the end of August before the September 1st deadline. And then after October 1st, we will start getting calls from people who waited 5 months and now are very, very angry that we can't fix this problem. So if you run into somebody, they have questions about homestead exemptions, there is a time limit to when we can fix those things. Give us a call. We're happy to handle that. We understand that people's circumstances change. We don't know who turns 65. We don't have this giant database that tells us that. And so when it happens, if people don't apply, and this is the first time they find out about it, we want to make sure we get them on there. There's an old saying that says, just because you have to pay taxes doesn't mean you have to leave a tip. Any questions any of the committee has?
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Armstrong, with respect to the Homestead Exemption Act or exemption, do you have to file that every year, every 2 years, just one time? Could you explain that to everyone?
The general homestead exemption, that's the one you get for owning and occupying a house. One application is fine. There's a narrow exception for ones that are involving a leasehold. There's fewer than a dozen of those countywide. In general, though, that's filed through your real estate transfer declaration. There's a question right on that says, is this going to be your principal residence? We already know you own it because you're buying it. And so we apply them from that. So most homeowners actually apply for it and never even realize that we do. So we pull those off and we process those forms. The senior citizen exemption does require an application, but it only requires one. That's when you turn 65, you'll want to apply then. The senior freeze does require an annual application. And the reason for that is it's income based. It's always based on a specific year's income. And those incomes can change year for year. The disability ones currently require an annual application by state statute. There are some exceptions being considered. Now, one thing about not applying for them each year means that over years, we're going to get houses that are going to not be eligible, but the exemptions are going to remain on there. And the thing we have to consider is how much it costs to police that versus how much tax inequity it results from it. So make no mistake, if I give out all exemptions or no exemptions, the county does not get any different money. Your levy is your levy. It's just distributed different. But if we have 30,000 people having a senior exemption who are not entitled to one, that means everyone else pays more money. So one of the things that I'm going to be looking at over the next couple of years is how do we actually try to address that process? There are a couple of vendors that have products that I'm going to be taking a look at to see if that's something that we would be interested in. Hiring more people, or at least one more person to handle that may be something we look at. All of that costs money. What I'm trying to figure out is to make a recommendation to you all as to what I think the best balance of taxpayer expense versus taxpayer equity is. And ultimately, since it's a budgetary matter, you guys get to make the call.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Shepro?
Mr. Shepro?
Mark, on the issue of the homestead exemption, we have compacts with other states for exchange of information?
I wouldn't call them compacts. Some states have very draconian rules about homestead exemptions if you get one that you're not entitled to. The best example would be Florida. The last I checked, Florida's homestead exemption is $50,000. Ours is $6,000. That would be the equivalent of $18,000 in Florida because Florida doesn't use fractional assessment. But at $50,000 a year, if they find somebody who gets an exemption in Florida and Illinois, the law allows them to go back 10 years So 50,000 a year times the tax rate for 10 years, plus 18% interest, plus a 50% penalty, and it's due immediately. If you don't pay it, you will lose your property. And so Florida has a you mentioned earlier, why would we spend this when we can get that? Florida has a very big incentive to look for that. Illinois does not. So what we're looking for with Florida is they'll be calling us saying, we've discovered this. And when that happens, we'll look for that. We do ask the question, do you own any other property in the United States on the application? If so, attach your tax bill. And if they have a homestead exemption there, we do not grant it here. But we don't have an easy way. There's no national registry of homestead exemptions. Now, one of the vendors, one of the vendors I'm looking at actually monitors a lot of different things, like say Social Security death records. And then they look at scrubbing rolls and bringing in information like that. And I don't have any costs on that. I haven't seen the demonstration. We're going to have it next week. That's something we can certainly take a look at, because at some point lowering the amount of exemptions means the tax rate is lowered, means other people aren't paying more money for them. But there is nothing like an interstate compact that would allow us to do that. And probably the biggest reason for that is every state has slightly different rules for what you would get, what qualifies for a homestead exemption. So it's not entirely a similar situation from state to state. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, maybe this is an interdepartmental question. If somebody were to register to vote in another state, and you were aware of that, would that cause somebody to lose a homestead exemption?
Absolutely. The vendor that we're looking at, voter registrations, is one of the things that they take a look at. The difficulty in voter registrations is sometimes we need information that we don't have. When you register to vote, you'll need not only your name, but your birth date, because age is one of the requirements for voting. So we don't maintain that information in our system. And at some point, names are going to be some names are more common than others. For instance, if you were to say, go up into the north part of St. Charles Township and the southern part of Elgin Township and look at the name Kenyon, I wanted to see if he'd react. He didn't. And you look at the name Kenyon, you can't swing a cat in that part of the county without hitting somebody named Kenyon. And names like Michael are going to be very common names. Is it the same Mike Kenyon? Other times you'll get an unusual name, and it's pretty easy to figure out. If the name was Napoleon Dynamite, there's probably only one of them. I would note there is at least one other Mark Armstrong in Kane County. And when I saw that person's DUI reported, I was like, oh, great, here we go.
There's also a lot of obituaries on the internet for Mark Armstrong. Not in Kane County.
Okay, I don't even know why you would know that, but I guess you found out I had COVID and decided to start checking.
Looking for clients in the newspaper.
Mr. Surges.
Mr. Armstrong, I'm wondering if maybe at some point in time, we might be able to get together for an educational instruction for me. So many of my constituents have reached out with the challenge that why is my building different than that building, blah, 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 blah. And I oftentimes try and retort, and my response might be inaccurate. But I will oftentimes look and say, when you're looking at residential properties, you're kind of comparing house versus house. It's not a big deal. But when you're looking at commercial properties, that valuation is sometimes not based on square footage or how pretty something is, but might be based on the financials of that building, rent rolls, pro formas, stuff like that. And trying to explain to a restaurateur that has a 5,000 square foot building who's sitting in the same luncheon with a light industrial user that's a 5,000 square foot building, who's sitting next to the guy with an apartment building that's 5,000 square feet. And they're all 5,000 square feet. They're all built out of the same materials, but the valuations are wildly different, and you're trying to explain it's not based on the products used to build it. It's based on the financial performance of the building. Sounds great to me. I don't know that that's accurate, that that's what you guys use.
That's actually highly accurate.
Okay.
Article 9, Section 4 of the Illinois Constitution of 1970 provides that property taxes have to be apportioned based on value as determined by the General Assembly. So value is where it starts off. So what we're looking at is not a pro rata share of someone's square footage to all the square footage in the county or in that taxing district, or however it's divided up for each individual levy, but the proportional value of the property. Remember when I talked about exemptions earlier causing inequities? If you have, let's say there's 20 people in this room and 10 of them have exemptions and 10 doesn't, the county's money coming in doesn't change, but the 10 who have the exemptions have lower tax bills. The other 10 are going to have higher tax bills. They're going to pay the difference on that. So with value differences, it's also the same. The more valuable the home is, as relative to other properties or your specific property, the more valuable the higher the proportional share of the tax burden is going to be. I'll give you an example of one I just looked up yesterday. On Orchard Road in Aurora, there was a Lowe's that was built in 2006. It did not perform well, and it closed in 2007 or 8. It was then sold into a company that made it into a combination. I think that was described in the newspaper as a combination grocery store dance club. It was like a grocery store for hip young people who like to dance with groceries. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the article described it well. And then that didn't go well, and the building's been sitting vacant. Now it is been purchased in 2020 by a company that prepares a food for home delivery type situation. So you're basically taking a store that is retail, and it's now being used for an industrial use. Well, generally retail is going to sell for more money, but what that means is in that place, that former Lowe's probably didn't have the ability, even though its traffic counts were similar to what you'd see with on Randall Road, where you have the Home Depot and the Menards in Geneva and Batavia. For some reason, it did not perform well at that location. Maybe they just didn't have the critical mass of retail to draw that out there. And so that building didn't perform well in the market. And so now it's selling for really a lesser use. You wouldn't need to make it that nice of a building to be at, to perform an industrial function. You wouldn't need to put it at a major signalized intersection. And you certainly wouldn't need to have all that retail parking to go with it. So now that property is going to be valued less simply because the market doesn't like that property as well as, say, the Menards and the Home Depot in Geneva and Batavia, even though they look very similar from the outside. The market has decided one is valuable and one isn't. And you can see that in their sales numbers and the fact that the two of them have full parking lots all the time and one never made it.
Understood. The other caveat to this is that I'm wondering if there is a way, or to at least, and maybe it's prohibited, to cap some of the costs. I am hearing that the assessments swing wildly at the quadrennial. And if you're the guy who bought the building on year one, maybe you're prepared for that leap. But if you're the guy who bought at the end of year 4, and all of your financials are based on year 4 data, and they change the very next year steeply, I'm wondering if there's a way that we might be able to cap that and raise that incrementally to allow those investors, if you will, to absorb that cost. The easiest example is to say, I own a 30-unit apartment building, and we've based our rents on this, based on the tax bill that we had. The next year, the quadrennial hit, the tax bill goes up $100,000. I can't adjust my rents. The rents are already set for a year. Where is that money supposed to come come from on June 1st to pay the bill if we can't make an adjustment that quickly? So my question is always, is there a way to suppress that? And I'm not saying suppress it from the terms, don't pay it, but be able to work through that to say, listen, we've put a 5% cap or a 3% cap or a 10%, whatever. We've put a cap on that, full well knowing that in those subsequent years during that quadrennial process, while you were artificially suppressed, we will then incrementally raise, allowing your financials to catch up and not catch these people off guard.
The short answer for that is we would need to change the Illinois Constitution.
Okay.
The prior response of when I talked about Article 9, Section 4 of the Constitution, and taxes have to be apportioned by value, means value is what we'd be going for. Now, in the specific situation you described, there's a couple of things that happen. A general assessment happens every 4 years. Our last one is in 2019. Our current one is in 2023. Each year, though, there is an increase that is made using equalization. And I spent some time a couple of months ago talking about equalization. You can see on page 31, equalization factors calculated by township. That should, in most cases, account for most of the issues. In a case you describe where you see a major increase, though, at the general assessment year, what that probably means is that that property was very high to begin with and was probably underassessed. I would counsel anyone who was basing their rents on what the taxes were, that they're actually doing it wrong. Your rent should be based on what the market would bear for it, because that's what your assessment is going to be based on. Under Illinois law, we don't look at actual performance, we look at what its typical performance would be. And that goes back to the Springfield Marine decision from 1970. It's not what a property's actual income is, but its capacity for earning income.
And Mark, I totally agree with you, but I do believe that there's an educational component that's missing, a brochure that's missing, because all of these developers, all of these business people, whatever they're doing, they're making snapshot decisions based on that moment in time and not looking at it. And then that crisis becomes our problem at the electorate level. And you're certainly not wrong in any way, shape, or form, but it certainly doesn't help them because the computation that was performed was flawed.
One thing
So-
I can
so-
I
so
can
how
provide is there's actually a very easy way that's generally accepted in the valuation community for measuring real estate taxes in exactly that situation.
Okay.
And it's you don't use it as an expense, but you use it as part of the overall capitalization rate. It's called a tax load. You simply apply the tax rate times the level of assessment, and then you add that to the overall rate of return you're looking for. That way, your income for income-based properties, your return, your tax bill can be expressed as a percentage of the return, not as a flat fee. It's the difference between using a static analysis and a dynamic analysis. If you say you're analyzing business costs and you say, well, I sell more money, but you don't account for the fact that you now have more distribution costs, you're not going to get a good analysis. So I'd be happy to write something up on how
I would
how
love that.
do-
And again,
it's very common in the evaluation community. Any realtor should know it. Any appraiser and assessor should know it.
my goal would be for this to trickle down. In my area, I'm half Rutland, half Dundee Township. For this to be able to trickle down to those offices so that we have a set model when somebody calls and says, hey, listen, we're interested in redeveloping Spring Hill Mall, or we're interested in that building that's crumbling and we're going to read it. Well, great. Here's the brochure on what your expectations should be. Don't miss this or come crying later, because we're being very upfront and educational about it. And as usual, I am not the smartest guy in the room. I understand the question. I don't have an answer. You do. How do we access that and allow that education to kind of trickle down and help some of our, frontline people with this?
Let me talk to our township assessors who do the frontline valuing and see if we can come up with something. We've already developed a common county-wide tax guide that's really designed for residents. maybe something like that.
I'm not hearing it
towards
from the residents. I'm
Well,
hearing it
that's
from
why I
the
say
bus- the
something like
business-
that designed towards commercial property owners, maybe along the lines of what you're looking for. Let me see what I can do.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Shepro.
Mr. Armstrong, I was under the impression that at least in some townships, they do annual updates on the assessments.
The Illinois law provides that every property has to be revalued in a general assessment year, and then the assessor is allowed to revise and correct values in non-general assessment years. The Second District Appellate Court ruled in Albee versus Sote, and that's a 1998, maybe that was around the tax year of it, that revise and correct does not mean revise or correct. So it has to come up with some reason why we don't think those prior values were correct. Otherwise, equalization takes care of that. So generally, you shouldn't see just a mass reappraisal in a non-general assessment year. It means there has to be a revision and correction. I can provide you with some actual commentary on that because I provide that in the annual instructional assembly for the township assessors on the difference between the two, if that would be helpful.
So if I got annual assessments for my residents from St. Charles Township, that would be because they found some error in the original valuation?
Yes, that's exactly what that means. By statute, that's the only way the assessor would have the authority to make a non-equalization change. But that that change may be because they found a physical change in the description. It could be because they ran a sales ratio study in your neighborhood and discovered that, wow, this does not work according to the model that we thought it would. Sometimes models get calibrated differently in different years because we discover that, I'll give you an example. If you calibrate a model and you base it on, say, finished basements, and I say finished basements and things because even though we're all supposed to get permits for our finished basements, doesn't always happen. So the data may be good. And it's the example I teach when I teach mass appraisal is if you add this component in and you get a higher coefficient of dispersion, that means you've probably got some bad data in there. So they may have had that. They now run the model again and they discover, gee, when we add in these basement numbers for this year based on the most recent sales, we're discovering those models are bad. Now we're going to recalibrate, we're going to revise and correct those. That might result in too. So it might not be something that they actually see on your property.
I guess my last follow-up on that was, my understanding is that the assessment process for the tax assessor is not individualized the way an appraisal of a particular piece of property would be done.
Practically speaking, yes. There's no statutory requirement that it not be. But if they don't use what's called mass appraisal, they're never going to finish on time. They're simply we have almost 200,000 parcels in the county. They couldn't do the work. As it is, we're currently using our mass appraisal models. Our assessment complaint rate is under 1%. I'll take that accuracy.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on. Regional Office of Education.
Good morning, everybody. We had our Educator of the Year banquet and it was a huge success. It was great to be back in person and to be able to honor teachers and educators throughout the county. I want to thank all of you that were able to be there and hopefully we can get some more of you for next year. Today, I have Dee Oliver and Josh Axelson with me. They work with our truancy program, and they're going to give you a brief report on what the truancy program has done this year.
Okay, so very grateful that you were able to give us some funding so that we can cover a truancy person. So we wanted to kind of give you some overall data and then more specifically to that person that that you have compensated for us. And so for all the data we've conducted this year, we've done 481 home visits so far, and we still have a couple weeks left of school. 4,963 school visits and contacts with students. And then family phone contacts, 3,586. And then we've conducted 194 school conferences. So when you drill down to the person in which we use the funding for, she actually serves East Aurora School District, Canelan School District, and Geneva School District. And so her data is pretty impressive. She's conducted 372 home visits this year and 140 school visits. She's made 868 phone calls. I'm glad it's her, not me. She's done 62 conferences with students and parents, and she's received 567 student referrals. She currently has 404 students on caseload. And so what we'll do in the fall with the annual report is provide additional information on how well the kids did in school, but we do have to wait for that school data that's specific to the students to come out. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions?
Question, Kopi?
Mr. Copey?
Hi, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Question I have is, does that office that you maintain to conduct those studies, is that county-wide? You just mentioned a few schools in particular, or school districts, if you will. And is that a norm across the state? And how did you say it was funded? That's too many questions.
Sure. So we do have other funds that cover the county-wide program, but specific to the person that you pay for through the county. That was the second data that we provided, but we do have every school served. And if the non-public schools contact us, we do serve them as well.
Thank you. Ms. Lewis?
Yeah, could you send us that, by the way? Okay, that was my number one question. And then you talked about District 131 in Canelan.
Would you use my?
Sorry,
Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry. You said 131 in Canelan and Geneva. Is that just one person, or is this person targeted those?
That's one
just one of the
person.
person's report.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. And do we ever, and I, this is a bad thing, but do we ever have to refer them to the state's attorney or to the attorney's office?
Yes, and Josh goes to court for those
Okay,
students.
how often does that happen? Or can you go into that just a spec?
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question. So typically as countywide, we have anywhere between 700 and 900 students that are on active caseload. In a typical year, we would maybe refer 10 juveniles to the local courts and typically 5 or 6 parents. So in the grand scheme of things, we really resort to court action as a last resort. What I can tell you is that when we have a family involved in the court setting, usually about 80 to 90% of the time, we have a very successful outcome. Students turn around their attendance, parents through attending parenting classes or family counseling, the students' attendance greatly improves. And so when we do have a family that's involved with the local courts, it is typically a very successful outcome.
That's good to know. Yeah, I know we don't like to talk about, sending truancy cases to our attorney's office, but if it's getting us results and keeping those kids and getting the parents to do what they need to do, I think,
Right. And the goal is never really consequences. We don't go in asking for fines or time in the youth home or anything like that. It's more to comply with counseling or whatever we feel is necessary to get the kids in school. So that's why it's a positive outcome. And our juvenile judges have been wonderful to work with.
thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shepro?
When you use the term countywide, is that literally Kane County or is that the educational service region?
It would be the educational service region. So the 9 public schools that we serve, we regardless of where the students reside.
I think
Yeah.
you go into McHenry and DuPage and
Can't-
like 10
Cook.
feet in DeKalb or something.
And into Cook.
Yeah.
And Cook and part of Cook. And that it gets complicated. We serve those kids, but we also have working relationships and partnerships with those other county offices. Because if we end up having to refer a student to court, we don't take kids into Cook County Court. And we don't go into DuPage County Court. We would refer them to that regional office and then they would start working with those kids.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Copy, please.
Mr. Copey?
Thank you. So I've been on the board for nearly 4 years, and I'm glad to hear that we are touching base with some of these issues in regards to truancy. Prior reports were basically the number of truancy, and I believe that the cases that you are conducting to date that you had mentioned, they are particular to those school districts. Now, I would assume that it's a countywide norm, and you alluded to that it's even more of an increased challenge when you get into Cook County. So I was curious if there's only one person that's heading up on these cases. How is it possible that they could cover the entire county at any given time? And then the other question I had that's always been looming, that I've asked on many occasions, was the evaluation that the student is that the truant student is predominantly mentally challenged. And I was just curious, do you still maintain that posture, and and especially at that rate? And is there an alternative to what is the reason for truancies?
So we actually have 4 people that serve truancy across the county. The other 3 are not funded by the county, but rather other funds that the Regional Office of Education covers. And so one person could never cover the entire county. So we'll always look for expansion. As far as that every single truant is having mental wellness issues, I would say that there's always some kind of issue that a student runs into, whether that's mental health, whether that's the parent preventing them from coming to school, whether there's an issue at the school that's preventing them from attending. There's 100 different reasons why kids choose not to go to school. And so when we can address the mental health issues in our program or refer them to county programs or through agencies or to the district, we do that. We also have alternative programs that some of the kids really buy into because it's a smaller learning environment. And we have about 20 to 25 sites across the county that when kids really have difficulty attending school, they may elect to choose one of the alternative programs to find more success.
Thank you. Moving on to the Veterans Assistance Commission, Mr. Zimmerman, welcome back.
Good morning. For the month of March, my report is included in your agenda packets. I'll briefly highlight that fiscal year to date, we've completed 900 forms, 218 claims or appeals, and secured $2.1 million in new benefits that went directly into veterans' pockets here in Kane County. And we assisted 186 veterans in the month of March. What the committee, I believe, will find more interesting is a change in the law that governs Veterans Assistance Commissions. This comes out of House Bill 5184 and some amendments there that passed the Senate and House unanimously and then was signed into law at the beginning of this month by Governor Pritzker as Public Act 102-732. It does various things, one of which cleans up some technical language that really needed to be fixed. It such as like archaic terms like almshouses. I was prohibited by law from putting somebody in an almshouse. I'm not quite sure what that is because they haven't existed for the second half of the 20th century. So it removed some archaic language there. It also clarified to Veterans Assistance Commissions across Illinois that they must help veterans with their disability claims to the VA. We have done that since in the 9 years I've been here and also before that, but other counties do not. So they will be required to do that now. It also gives us more independence. So we've always been an independent unit of local government, which has our own board of directors, if you will, the commission that meets separately from this committee. And we had reported in for fiscal oversight purposes to the county board chairman or her designee, which in this case is the Public Service Committee. This law does end that reporting, that mandated reporting to come to this committee. However, in the 9 years I've been here, I've had an excellent relationship with the county board that I believe has been mutually beneficial. And since the county will be still our treasurer and still has to supply us with necessary supplies, telephone, postage, et cetera, I've indicated to Mr. Tepe that I'd still like to come here and allow me to do free advertising for our services that we've done. And I think he's agreed to that. And then finally, Mr. Surges and I had lunch yesterday, specifically the Death by Chocolate Mousse, which is highly recommended from Craft Urban. I think we both agreed. But Mr. Surges and Mr. Tepe will be coming to the commission's meeting on Monday night, the regularly scheduled meeting that we have. That concludes my report, but I'd be happy to entertain any questions that the committee has.
You neglected to mention office space when you talked about what was provided. So we're still going to see you on the.
Yes, the county is still required to give me space in a county building or another other centrally located location.
Just kidding.
We'll still be here.
Mr. Surges.
Vern, as the Chair of Human Services, where Jake was reporting previous to coming here, we have been monitoring this and watching this legislation pass through. And at lunch yesterday, some of my specific questions to Jake were, where does the funding now come from? And are we just squeezing a balloon that's popping out in other places? And Jake, tell me if I'm wrong here, but the question was, are you now a new taxing line item that will appear on the county's tax bill? And are you working with whom? The treasurer's office, not the finance office, but the treasurer's office to make that happen? And are we assisting you through this committee to make that happen? And we might not know that answer yet. Or are we just saying that you're not an additional tax line item? You are just an unfunded mandate that says you now get up to a certain amount that we're obligated to give you out of the existing county budget, which then throws it squarely into finance, not to the treasurer's office. And Vern, I don't have those answers, but I think those are the questions that help us decide. And then I would be negligent if I didn't say,
that was
decide where the funding mechanism is coming from.
That was such a simple question.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So, and then my second statement is 2 years ago, we were, the Human Services Committee was notified by, help me with the gentleman's name.
Mr. Barry Roberts.
Who was nice as could be, but he made an impassioned speech that we at Kane County have the benefit of a team that works statistically far and above the rest of the state.
correct.
It's not even close. It's not even a question. Yet our team gets paid considerably under the average. I mean, so we're well below. I mean, and this nice gentleman whom I'm understanding fell ill, but is now doing well, and we wish him all the best. Truly brought that to us, and we told Jake at that time, we'll look at it in this budget cycle. We'll look at it in this budget cycle. Well, now, Corinne, part of the decision, Madam Chair, part of the decision is whose decision is that now? If and where is the funding coming from? But Monday night, you will have at least one champion in your corner, and I'm hearing two, to say, we would like to get you where you need to be. I just don't understand where that money's coming from, and we need to kind of figure that out a little bit, before we go forward with it. And I don't want that to be a torpedo. I don't want this has been openly discussed for the past 2 years. And we're to the point in time that the legislation is now here, just not quite sure what it says. Yeah, similar to Ron Haynes and the sheriff's office, his legislation has come through and it's taken a couple of months to kind of figure out the nuances of that. I think you're in the same spot, but now that we know what those nuances were for him, we need to figure that out for you.
Yes.
And I am now subordinate to Vern as chairman of this committee, but I am here to support you in any way I can.
Sure.
There are times when I'd like to see us have a court recorder where we could repeat the question. But if you
Read back the
could-
question, please.
If you could address the main points that
Yeah.
Mr. Surges brought up.
So the points there, the consensus across Veterans Assistance Commissions in Illinois is that we would have our own separate line item on a Kane County tax bill, like the Forest Preserve District or your local fire district.
Okay.
I've had emails out to the finance department and the treasurer's office. There's some absences right now in those offices, so I don't know that I'm going to get a quick answer on that. I think we do have the time to discuss that. The salary, that was something that was previously up to the county and the county board, subject to various provisions, but that's something that has been returned to the commission now. So the commission will be the one up to the budgeted amount that we would be able to set the salaries.
Okay, and I do want to make one final comment that the legislation gives Jake's department, how do I say this? I find the legislation to be inequitable in how it's designed, yet I understand their philosophy and what their methodology was. There are certain Veterans Assistance Commissions in certain areas that are attached to a VA hospital. So I believe the legislation meant to fund to that grand scale. We don't have a VA, but Jake does have the ability to go up to a considerably high amount. And the discussion is that we're in no way, shape, or form asking for anywhere near that. Am I paraphrasing
Yeah,
that?
you're 100% correct. The funding formula is based on economic development and taxable value. So it's 0.02% of the last known property value in your county. That taxable value here is $16.3 billion. So that would mean 3.2 million or something for my office here, something on the order of almost 10 times what we have now.
What's your current budget?
$349,000,
And what's the max you could do?
3.2 million.
I mean, there's an inequity. I mean, that's a huge jump.
And I don't think that that funding formula is appropriate. I don't know what is. I'm not gifted like Mr. Armstrong with math and all those types of things. That's why I do the job I do. But just to give you a comparable, in Peoria County that has about half the veterans we do and not as much economic development, their budget would go up to 690,000. So with only half the veterans we have. So it's not fair or equitable, but I don't know what is. Will be fair and equitable to provide the just and necessary assistance to veterans in Kane County, and nowhere near $3.2 million.
You are being super humble and polite, and I thank you for that.
Let me just, share with everybody here that this has just recently been acted. We don't know exactly how far this is going to go. I know Madam Chair had requested a presentation, but I think with what Mr. Zimmerman had said in his response back to Madam Chair, that presentation on this would take a little bit longer to put together and to be accurate. We need to let this kind of settle down a little bit before we kind of react to it. But Madam Chair.
You sent some information to me.
Microphone, please.
I'm so sorry. The other day, you sent some information to me, but you just mentioned Peoria right now. What is the current budget for Peoria?
600.
Sure. So with half the veterans that we have here in Kane County, the Peoria County Veterans Assistance Commission has a $587,000 budget. So much larger than ours. And even with the increases that I've put in for our next year's budget, we're still not even within $100,000 of that. And part of that space, we're in the government center here. And if I wanted to hire somebody, I wouldn't even have a place to put them. We do have the square footage, but it becomes a privacy issue. We're talking about military sexual trauma in my office with veterans, PTSD, all of these things, HIPAA stuff, has to be private. So some of those spaces would end up being shared if I hired another person. And so the head count in Peoria County is 7. We have 4. We could probably have a larger head count, but I wouldn't have a place to put them.
Do you need it? Do you need it?
I think my staff does a very effective and efficient job with what we have now, and I think they're proud of that. We could use it. We have used, let me rephrase a little bit here. We have relied on something called the VA's work study program. So it allows veterans who are going to school on the GI Bill to come work for us on a part-time basis, averaged on 25 hours a week during the semester. The VA pays them directly, and they come work at our office, answer the phone, safety relief valve. That's worked very well in the past. A matter of fact, we've had the hours worked to be well over 1 full-time equivalent in any given fiscal year. The decline, we've had a decline on the use of the GI Bill in Kane County, probably because the economy in the recent years has been really well. So we've had less students available to do that. So I could probably use an additional person, but again, I don't know where I'd put them.
Thank you. That's good. That's just.
Thank
good
you,
planning.
Mr. Shepro.
Good planning.
The statute, among other things, indicates that the county may levy a tax not to exceed 0.3% of the assessed value of property. And by referendum signed by electors could increase that amount. And it also specifies that the veterans assistance tax is outside the tax cap. So whatever we levy would not count against the property tax
Not too bad.
limitation. And there's also provisions for a tax to be levied and money to be funded to like related veterans organizations.
Well, again, this needs to settle down a little bit. We're going to have a presentation on this in a couple of months. So we need to
I believe.
get more details so that everybody's prepared. Okay. Thank you. Before we move into the county clerk's area, I want to make a note that tonight at 5 o'clock, there are 6 people that are graduating from the drug court. So there's a drug court graduation ceremony again at 5 o'clock. It's in the Randall Road Court Extension address, which is where the clerk's office is noted, but 6 people graduating from the drug court is, in my mind, a phenomenal accomplishment. So it's there. Our next report is associated with the county clerk. The key thing we're going to have is a presentation on election security and on mail-in voting. We sent out a note to the board. Mr. Copey and I discussed this last week. We're going to do a couple of things. One, we're going to request that all questions be delayed to the end of the presentation. Okay. And we want to answer every question. We may not be able to answer them here. If not, we will refer them to the clerk's office, county clerk's office, and they will handle that aspect of it. The second thing is it's not only being recorded in our meeting, this is going to be, they're going to create a separate recording of just this presentation and put that up on YouTube. So we will be able to have a YouTube file that we can make available people to see this. Okay, so thank you. And I now turn things over to Mr. Brian Pollock. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning. First of all, thanks for having me go after Jake. You have the rock star go and you put me here. Hand out ice cream and puppies first. Come on. Good morning, everyone. Happy Election Day. If you don't realize, today is the first day of early voting. So you'll see the canvas out there, the covering. People have already started coming in. So it's like Groundhog Day. It'll be 40 days of election days from now till June 28th. So you may hear me repeat things a few times. I'm going to try to move it along looking at the hour. I don't want to get the wrath of Mr. Kenyon here, but we'll,
Don't worry about Mr. Kenyon.
maybe some questions that you have even after this, if that probably could be answered if you had come over to the office and see the process. The nice thing about this right now is we're discussing it. A lot of this stuff is going to be going on in the next few weeks. As the ballots start to come back in, please feel free to come over, just like other members of the public will as poll watchers, to come and see how it works. We're going to do a snapshot. We're going to go through all the safeguards and show you the step-by-step. But when you see it in action, you'll see what we're talking about. And I think it can help. So with that, vote by mail and election security are obviously hot topics. That's why we're talking about it. You hear it on the news, you hear it here. So this may seem like commonplace to us, but we want to make sure that the voting public understands what's going on and that they feel secure in what we're doing. The clerk's office has always taken and will continue to take election security very seriously. Ensuring that we have a safe, secure, and transparent election process is important not just to us, but it's also important to the voters, and obviously important to you as well. So what we're going to go through is the election security plan, and it summarizes the steps that we have taken in the past and will continue to take in the future. But understand that this does change. We're a creature of the General Assembly. And so anytime the legislature makes changes, we have to implement them. When there's a law, we follow it. Sometimes those laws change before an election. Sometimes they change during an election. But it's our job to make sure that we're responding to those and following them. So what we talk about now may be different before the next election because there may be different laws that come into effect. A lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about, we dealt with in the last election. We did in the last election, but we learned from the last election. We learned from the consolidated election. And so it is an evolving process. Again, that's why it's kind of important for you guys to see it. Understanding election security, especially the vote by mail process, it's important to understand how vote by mail works so you understand the security measures that we're talking about. We've come to this committee in the past. We've made multiple presentations on vote by mail and election security, but some of you are new to the committee, some of you are new to the board. So I'm going to highlight just a little bit. We made a long step-by-step presentation before the 2020 general election. Here are just some slides from that presentation. You'll see some of that stuff coming back because the process is still the same. Like I said, it's important to understand vote by mail if we're going to talk about election security. And one thing to understand about vote by mail is that it's not new. We may be talking about it now as if it's new, but it's really not. It's the same method of voting that voters in Kane County have used for decades. The name has changed. You used to hear about absentee voting. Well, it's the same thing. The General Assembly changed the words from absentee voting to vote by mail in 2015. Otherwise, the process is the same. The difference is the numbers. The difference is the number of people who have chosen to vote by mail over the years has increased, and really increased mostly in the last few years. Not expecting you to see every little number on this chart, but I'll kind of go through it. We go back to 1968. All this information is available on our website. So another part of our transparency initiative is if you want to see election results going way back, if you want to see it broken down by vote by mail, early voting, in-person voting, all that stuff's there. This is from our website. So if you go back to 1968, you had 2,500 people who voted, quote, absentee, that's what they called it at that point, or vote by mail. So those numbers, depending on the election, obviously less people vote in a consolidated, more people vote in a general. But those numbers were consistent for several decades. 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 that voted at that point by mail in a general election. You hit about 8,000 in 2004. You stayed in the 4,000 or 5,000 in general elections. Numbers went up to about 8,000 in 2016. In 2018, we had a little under 15,000. And then the number obviously increased significantly in 2020. Whether that was just due to the pandemic or that was a decision of voters to continue down that road, we'll see in these next elections coming up. Oops. So this chart, again, you're not gonna see every step, and I'm not asking you to read everything. We're going to break down each step in the process, but we took the whole from the beginning, from the ballot creation to ballot storage, and broke it down into 8 steps. And then each of those little pieces on the flow chart are sub-steps. And we thought that it's easier to digest when you're looking at it step by step, to simplify it, and also to help educate. If we want people to understand what we're doing, we need to be able to explain it in an easy, digestible process. And the color coding we'll get to a little bit more, but the color coding also helps you understand what's happening at that point in each stage in the process. The colors here correspond to colors in the secure area where all of the processing is going on. We'll show you, but when something's orange, that's the orange section. Those are the things that are happening in the orange section. So people can look and see, oh, orange is ballot creation. That's all happening here. That's what they're doing. You'll hear that again and again throughout the process. So the first step is ballot creation. You see the flow chart. And so each of those steps we're going to talk about here in the subsequent slides. So this is the beginning. The first step is that the voter fills out the vote by mail application. So we've talked about it before, one little change, state law changed last year. Now a voter can apply for what they call a permanent vote by mail status. So if that voter chooses to request vote by mail ballots for multiple elections, not just one election, that's allowed under state law. One security safeguard that our office has taken is that anyone who wants to request that permanent vote by mail status needs to fill out the application on paper. So we have that wet signature rather than just through the online portal. Not that the online portal isn't secure, but if you're going to have that kind of request for future elections, we want to have a record with your signature to go in your voter registration file for the voters' protection. And, again, it's a security measure. But the online portal is still available for anyone that wants to request a ballot for just one election at a time. So step 2 is that once that request comes in, the elections department confirms that the applicant is actually a registered voter. So using our voter registration database, you may see references to VRS in this presentation, which stands for Voter Registration System, or DFM or EIMS, which is the vendor. So those things may come up, but basically, so the voter requests the ballot, and then our voter registration database goes to check, is that person a registered voter? So without getting into some of the wild theories we hear out there, just keep in mind, only registered voters are in the voter registration database. Only someone who completes an application who is already a registered voter can request a ballot. So no one who is not registered to vote can request a vote by mail ballot. That person won't be in our system, thus there won't be an entry, thus a ballot can't be mailed to that person. So we verified that the person is registered, the person sent in the application, and then the process starts where the ballot is printed. Another thing you're going to hear me say over and over again, anytime ballots are being handled, processed, tabulated, verified, whatever you want to call it, anytime a ballot is out, you have at least one team of a Democrat and a Republican judge there. So you're going to have a bipartisan team or teams reviewing every step of the process. One thing you'll also see, we'll get into the cameras on those things, the judges, besides their little badges, which sometimes are hard to see, we have vests. So the Democratic judges will have a blue vest with a D on the back. The Republican judges will have a red vest with an R on the back. So if you're over there and you see these people, okay, they're doing something. They're in the orange section or the blue section. I see a blue and a red vest. Okay, great. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Move on. Again, more levels of security and safeguards throughout the process. So a little highlight on some of the equipment. This is the folding machine. So We bought this folding machine prior to the 2020 election. It folds. Fun, nice name for it. So the ballot, actually, let me skip ahead, sorry. This is actually the printer. We'll start with the printer. The printer prints the ballots. By having the printer in-house, it's another security measure. So we're not sending ballots out to a third-party vendor. We're doing them in-house. So everything stays here. Obviously, it's more secure. If, in the past, we've had to go out before we have the printer, but it's another layer of making things better. Sorry, we'll go back to the folding machine. Ballot's been printed, now it goes to the folder. Because of our language requirements, having to have ballots in English and Spanish, we use that larger paper. If you've ever requested a ballot, you'll notice it's long. What we learned in the last election cycle was if you take that ballot and you fold it twice instead of once, instead of being in a giant envelope, it goes to a smaller envelope. We saved $1.50 in postage per envelope. In the last election, we had over 90,000 that went out. We had 80,000 that came back. So do your math, we saved more than $200,000 with that extra fold for a $15,000 machine. Sounds like good math to me. So ballot's been printed, ballot's been folded, and then on the outside of the exterior envelope, so you've got to put the ballot, the instructions, any affidavits, the ballot itself, and then the return envelope all goes in that big envelope. So the machine you'll see in a second, the inserter, does all that and automates the process. On that exterior envelope, we have their name, the barcodes, and one extra thing, level of security we added for this election is we now have an additional tracking system to track the intelligent mail barcode, which shows so we knew when the ballot left here. We obviously knew when it came back, but the IMB helps us know when that ballot went to the other post offices along the way. So if it leaves here, goes to the Geneva post office, if it's mailed to someone in Elgin, it's going to get to the Elgin post office, then to their house, then back to Elgin, then back to Geneva, then back here. So with this IMB tracking, we have that end-to-end or Amazon style tracking. Mr. Surgis brought up the issue in the past. I know, Cliff, you've said, you were concerned about when someone puts that ballot back in, because the law allows someone to return a ballot as long as it's postmarked by election day. And sometimes ballots don't get postmarked. So, state law says, look at the affidavit. Through the IMB, we're going to know when it got to we'll call it the first post office. So if we're going to I don't know what post office goes to, but it'll come into, somewhere up there. If it comes back within, a day or two of the election, then it probably was dropped on election day and got here. If hits the first post office a week later, then it probably didn't get postmarked on election day. So to answer your question and to address some of the other issues, that's another layer of security that's going to let us know when those ballots were in fact mailed. Like we said, the postage is marked on the envelope, the ballot's mailed to the voter, and through our ballot track system, the voter can track the process. Tracking instills confidence in the voters and gives us another layer of security to know where things are. Obviously, US Post Office is out of our hands, but it's the process. So this is the sorter. I'm sorry, this is the inserter. All of those those levers coming up, those are the slots where things are inserted. So the ballot, the affidavits, the return envelope, et cetera, they go through, and instead of doing them manually and taking minutes at a time to fold everything through the assembly line and do it, this thing does hundreds in a minute. So it automates the process. Like I said, it assembles hundreds rather than hundreds a minute versus several an hour. The barcoding, like we talked about, increases voter confidence. There's a quality control side to it. So every certain amount of the envelopes will come through, drop out, and then we verify to make sure that they have everything on there that is supposed to be there. It weighs them. It looks for so if something were missing, if a form were missing, it would catch that the weight is not uniform. So something's wrong, something's not in it. And that's part of the quality control process. Again, in terms of savings to taxpayers, we calculated from the general election, instead of doing 4 an hour, we were doing thousands an hour. You know, the machine more than paid for itself just in the first use of it. And ballots, military ballots went out last week. And now we're in the early voting and vote by mail time. So this is cute. Thank you, Blair. If you could hit that. This is just a quick grainy cell phone video of the process. So the ballots are being folded, going through the folding machine. Then they'll come out. They're taken over to the sorter. Now you kind of see the sorter. Obviously it's preloaded. You're going to see the process as all of those packets get put together, assembled. It's going to go through the inserter and then come out, folded, sealed, stamped that way. So that's step one. Step two, this is the step that you're probably most familiar with. This is what the voter actually does. The voters requested the ballot now the ballot comes. So the ballot's delivered to their house. The voter fills out the ballot, folds it, puts it back in the envelope, signs the certification on the back of the envelope, and then returns it to the clerk's office. And so there are several ways to do that. They can stick it back in the mail. They can put it they can drop it at one of these 3 secure drop boxes. So the 3 drop boxes are in the lobby of the clerk's office, in the lobby of the clerk's office in Aurora, and then at City Hall in Elgin. All 3 drop boxes have cameras. All 3 drop boxes are open and available only during business hours. So you're not going to come and do it when no one's there. So they are secured. You can come and drop it in person at the clerk's office and not the box, and people can drop it off at an early voting or an election day voting site to the judges. So then the ballots come back to the elections office through the mail or through whatever way the voter chose to do it. And then, as we talked about earlier, the voter can track their ballot through our ballot tracking system. Step 3. So now this will be the yellow. We'll get to that here. So now the ballot, we're going to hold the questions to the end. So the ballots are now coming back to the office. So the first stop will be the mailroom. So when the ballots get to the mailroom, a team of Democratic and Republican judges in their fancy vests will go to the mailroom to meet the mail and then bring it down to the clerk's office. So once it's from the time it comes in our possession, there are Democratic and Republican judges there with it the whole time. They come down. Again, everything is in the team, the bipartisan teams, as we're calling them, work in tandem to make sure that all these safeguards are met. And they will use what we call the ballot control log. So in addition to everything being logged digitally through the machines and going into our voter registration database, we also have good old fashioned paper too. So the judges log everything on the paper and they sign off on them. So things should match. So the first thing they're going to do is when that tray comes in, they're going to look to see if there's any ballots that came back that were undeliverable, damaged, anything that's not going to run through the system. And then sometimes the post office sticks labels on pieces of paper and staples. They'll take those apart so that when it comes down to the processing room, the envelopes will be ready to run through the system. So the ideal is that on the same day when the mail comes in, right afterwards, they're going to get started on processing everything. If we have another election like we had in 2020, where we've got 2 mail deliveries a day and we're running things constantly, sometimes things may have to wait in the meantime. So anytime that those ballots are in our possession and they're not being processed, tabulated, verified, whatever it is, they're locked. They're locked in the container. Those containers have seals. Those seals have numbers. Anytime those seals are broken, the 2 judges are there and they're going to sign off on them and the number's recorded. So if this box comes in and it has seal number 1 on it, on that log, it's going to say seal number 1 had the delivery at whatever so-and-so time on so-and-so date. It's then put in a secure room. If it's not being processed right away, it's being processed right away, we go through the process. Let's say there's a delay for some reason where judges are working on something else, then the 2 judges will go to the secure room, the vault. They'll sign off that they went in there. They're going to bring it out. They're going to open up that box. They're going to take off the seal. They're going to record that they opened the seal, and they're going to record and the log is going to show that that was done. So anytime the ballots are being touched, judges are there. Anytime ballots are not being worked on, they're sealed, the seal's locked, the seal's recorded. So when they're ready to start, they're going to open up that box. They're going to be put into the to be processed area, and they're going to be ready to go into the sorter. So the sorting machine, the sorter, whatever we call it, they're put there and they're ready to go through for the first pass. Again, if you haven't been over to the office, check it out. When the siren goes off, it's like when the luggage rack starts at the airport, the noise goes off and machine starts working. The envelopes go through the sorter. So on what we call the first pass, they're going to go through to weed out the ones that aren't readable, whether they're damaged, whether there's something there. Very few come that way. Most of them are in good shape. So they're going to go through. And in that first pass, the machine at a rapid pace is going to take a picture of the signature, scan that signature, which we'll get to in a second, and then it's going to date stamp when that ballot envelope was received in the office. And that gets logged into our voter registration database so that we know, okay, Brian requested the vote by mail ballot. It was returned to the office on June 1st. It was received here, logged in, the signature was scanned, that the judges are going to verify in a minute, and the ballot came in at that point. So in the voter registration database, it's going to show I already returned my ballot. So I can't go and vote another way because it's already been logged in that I've returned my ballot. So that separates the good versus not good. Just an easy way of looking at it. So for those envelopes that are good, don't have any issues from the physical standpoint, those signatures are then, like I said, scanned and they're exported for verification. Oops. So that's the sorter would be to the left side of that. As it runs through the sorter, they're going to go into their packets that are at the end of the sorter. When they're taken out of those packets, they're going to move over to we have basically the same level of packets on the other side. So there's going to be moved across while we're waiting for them to be signatures to be verified and go through the second level of a pass. But like I said, those signatures are exported for verification. Step 4 is the verification. So after the envelope goes through the first pass, at a separate station, the signature verification station, you have a team of Democratic and Republican judges that are going to verify every signature. It's not a computer verifying it, it's humans, a bipartisan team that reviews every signature. So as I said, those signatures are exported from the sorter's computer to our voter registration database. Those envelopes are scanned and preserved. And then the team of Democratic and Republican judges that verify the signatures begin their work. So they sit together, have a big screen. On one side of the screen, you have the signature that was captured from the envelope. On the other side of the screen, you have this voter signature from our voter registration database. It's up to the judges then to make the decision. Does the signature match? Have they completed the verification and confirmed the signature? Are they challenging the signature, or is there no signature? So obviously, if there's no signature, it can't be verified. So then that voter will be contacted to let them know you sent a ballot in, but you didn't sign the envelope. We can't verify your signature. If you want to vote by mail, you have to come and verify your signature. Come identify who you are, show us sign it, show us that your signature matches, and we'll count it. So a voter is informed and has the opportunity to cure that problem. Same with if the signature doesn't match. The voter is contacted and told the judges went through the process, the signature doesn't match. If you did sign this, if you are who you are, come to the office, verify who you are, present your identification, and show us, your signature and tell us that you did this. Okay, that's fine. in most cases, it's a similar process to actually in-person voting on election day. When you go show up to vote, an election judge, when you sign, will check your signature. Same thing, except you don't have a no signature. Either it's verified or it's not. And if your signature is challenged at the polling place, you have an opportunity to present ID and show you are who you are. This is just the same process, but through the vote by mail process. For the vast majority, the signatures are verified by the judges, and then they'll move on to the next step. Those signatures will go back through, they'll be logged into the voter registration database as verified, and that report will go back to the other room where they'll run it through the sorter again. We'll get to that step in a second. Judges sign off on the complete report, whether the signatures match, didn't match, or no signatures. So all those numbers match. If they were reviewing 100 ballots, that report should show that 100 signatures were examined one way and whatever the outcomes are. All of our signature verification judges go through training from a handwriting expert. It's a multi-hour training course. I'm not going to go through all the slides. I'm just show you a few of them to show some of the things they look at. Overall, they're looking at just general signatures in general, the theories of signature analysis, how signatures change over time, how signatures change with medical conditions, things to look at to see whether signatures are genuine or not. Here's an example. President Nixon's signature changing from 1968 to 1974. Same person, just signatures evolve over time. And those are things that the judges are gonna have to look at. If the specimen signature is the 1968 signature and the 1974 signature is on the back of the envelope, is that a match? Well, that's what the training class helps to do. And also another thing, looking at slopes, looking at the way people write. Again, these are part of the training that the judges are gonna get. So the ballot's now gone through the first pass of the sorter. The signature was captured. The signature has been reviewed by a bipartisan team of judges. Now that envelope is going to go through a second pass. You'll see yellow again because step 3 and step 5 involve the sorter. So they're both going to be done in that same section. So people that are in to view the process, observers will see, okay, this is the yellow section. These are things that are going on. One thing I didn't mention, for those that come over to the clerk's office, we'll get to it later, but we'll have a liaison to explain the process to the observers. So you can see, hey, this is the yellow section. Whether we have a smaller version of the flow chart. You can see here the steps that are going on in the yellow section. If you're watching it, you'll see these are the things to look forward to. If you have any questions, here we have someone, an election judge, can explain this process to you. So we're getting ready to go through the second pass now because it's gone through the first time to capture the signature. Now we want to sort them by precinct. So that envelope is going to go through the sorter for a second time. We have the report from the election judges that verify the signatures, which ones are good and which ones are bad. So the sorter is going to pop through the good ones into the good pile and then have them sorted by precinct. And the ones that were rejected because there was no signature or the signatures didn't match, are going to go into a separate packet. When I say packet, they're little slots on the side of the machine. So the good ones will be ready to move to the next step. The ones that were challenged or had no signature will be put into a separate pile. And then, like we said, the voter will be contacted to have the opportunity to cure. On to step 6, the opening and inspection of the ballots. So keep in mind here, we've gone through 5 steps already. This is the first time that the actual envelope is going to be opened. So we spent 2/3 of this process verifying and going through these security steps to make sure that the vote is registered, that the voter actually applied for the ballot, that the signature matches before we open anything. So by the time you get to this process, you've had several layers of verification to make sure that this ballot should have made it to this process and should be opened. Because we're not going to open a ballot if the person's not registered, the signatures don't match, etc. So at that point, the ballots will then go to the extraction machine. And so this extraction machine cuts off, opens the top of the envelope, and then the next step is the ballot pops up so that the election judge can remove or extract the ballot from the envelope. Keep in mind at that point, it's still folded. So we have the principle of the secret ballot in this country so that the judge that is using the extractor through that machine where it cuts it, that theoretically could see the envelope and see the voter's name. When that envelope, when the envelope is opened and the ballot pops out, it's folded. The judge that unfolds the ballot is not the same judge that is at the extractor. So that judge is not going to have an opportunity, even if he or she wanted to see the actual votes on that ballot. At this point, the ballot is separated from the envelope. So the next team of judges will unfold it and get it ready for processing. Doesn't see the envelope. So the secrecy of your ballot is preserved at that point when when the ballot's separated from the envelope. So sometimes in the envelope, there's an affidavit of assistance for a voter who needed help filling out the ballot. The affidavit is then separated from the ballot. They'll go with the other data or the other forms. But at that point, the separation exists, and then the ballots are placed into the tray. They're sorted by precinct, and then they're ready to go to the next step of the process.
Brian, just so we're calibrating our time, are you like halfway through, just about through, or are we just getting started?
We're probably about 2/3 through. That's the extractor. So then the judges are going to unfold the ballots. You're going to look at them and see, is the ballot able to be scanned? Has it been mutilated, torn? Is there a giant coffee stain on it? Is it wet? Whatever. Can it go through the process? If it is, it's a good ballot. If it's not, we're going to have to do something with it. Because imagine that scanner. It can only read ballots that are able to be scanned and of the same format. So if the ballot's good and it's ready to go, it's going to be processed. If it's damaged, if it's in another form, quick note here is military ballots. State and federal law allows a voter that's a member of the armed forces or an overseas resident to use what we'll call a non-standard ballot that allows an electronic transmission of the ballot. So when that comes in, obviously it can't be scanned because it's not of the same size as the regular ballot. A team of Democratic and Republican judges will replicate that ballot so it can be scanned. But just so you understand, that scanner can only read a ballot that was made in our office. It goes by the weight of the paper, it goes by the style. If it's off, it won't read it. So the idea that someone could make ballots on their own and try to send it back, not the same weight, not the same, the watermark's not there, not the same size, font's not the same, the scanner's not going to see where the marks are at the same spot, won't read it. So another security measure. Step 7, tabulation. You call it tabulation, call it processing. Understand that the tabulation isn't done, the actual count isn't done until after the polls are closed on election night. But the processing of it being scanned, we can scan them and have them ready to go. No one knows what the marks on the ballot say. They're not counted. No one knows how many votes for each race someone got. All we know is that X amount of ballots have gone through the process, been verified, and been scanned in. Only after 7 o'clock on election night do we know how those votes are cast. In that secure tabulation room, nothing's connected to the internet. Everything is done through that system in that room and on cards so that nothing is broadcast over the internet. As we said, if you remember 2020, thanks to the automated system, we were able to have about 80,000 of the vote by mail ballots that had come in prior to election day or on election day already verified, scanned, and ready to go. So that at 7:15, when that first wave came up You saw 80 some thousand vote by mail ballots, plus the 101,000 early votes that had been cast. So you saw about 80% of the votes because that was the ratio that came in prior to election day. Those things were all up. When other counties were still trying to open envelopes, trying to process things, counting their votes overnight through the next weekend, we were already done. You want accuracy, you also want speed. So we went through this process. They're going to go through Democratic and Republican judges at every step of the process. They get scanned. They're held until election night when they're tabulated. Last step is storage. As I said before, anytime ballots are not being used or actively done, actively touched, they're in a secure container. The secure container has a seal. The seal is numbered, it's locked and recorded. When the ballots go through the entire process, you're going to see all the logs that went with it, the paper reports of everything, and that they will go into the secured vault to be held. I guess on time, there's a video that I kind of wanted you guys to see, but Blair, if you just want to send it out in the chat later or send it out to the board members if we're running short on time. It's a video that NBC News did from 2020. It's a nice overview of the process to see how end to end it goes. But if you come to our office, you can see the same thing. So as we've said, we've taken election security very seriously. It's the clerk's office's goal to be the most transparent and secure election authority in Illinois. We've talked about the color coding so that when you as an observer can see what's happening, you see you're in the yellow section, you're in the orange section, you're in the purple section, that's what's happening. Here are the steps we've told you what should be happening, and make sure it's happening the way it's supposed to be happening. Make sure there are two judges there, at least two judges there for each step of the process. We have cameras focused on each section, as we said. Here was the cameras being installed at several areas through the ballot room. Here's one of the views of all the cameras. There are screens that are up in the office for observers. So if the room is filled to capacity, then an observer can be out at one of the screens looking at all of the camera monitors to see what's happening at all those sections. So if you can't be in the yellow section and you want to see what's going on, you can be in the room or with other observers and see, okay, that's the yellow section, that's the blue section, that's the whatever section, or you can be there as you wish. A couple principles of this process: the bipartisan chain of custody. At every point, there's a Democratic and Republican judge together. Sorry. Ballots can only be accepted and be in our custody and only come through from from the time they come into our office to the time they're stored with a Democratic or Republican judge. The seals are there. We talked about that. Bipartisan team does the signature comparison. We talked about the locks and seals. That's an example of what the seal looks like. They're on there, they're numbered. When they're opened, they're recorded, they're put in a log. So we know who was there and what happened. The paper documentation we talked about, these are those logs that people are going to, sign and verify and put the numbers on and all that stuff. It's kept in the system. It's also digitally, it's also done on paper. We encourage observers to come. The office is open. Please feel free to come on over, elected officials as well as the public. If the room's, like we said, if the room's full, you can look at the camera views on the big screens. We want our observers to be aware of the process. That's why we'll have the election judge liaison there to answer questions or explain anything so people know what they're seeing. Nothing's hidden. It's all there for you. As we said, we have different levels of security. We have electronic, we have paper, we have some of those, we've gone through all these safeguards. And then a sheriff's deputy will also be there in case of any issues that come up. Following the rules is important. It's important, obviously, to make sure the election goes the way it should. It's also important to instill confidence in the voters, to know that, the staff is doing what they're supposed to do, the election judge is doing what they're supposed to do, and this is really an election judge-driven process. That's why they're there at every step of the process. Our staff is there to assist and do some of the technical things, but the judges are the ones handling the ballots. And in order to have that confidence from the voters, that you have a Democrat and a Republican there for every step of the process. So that's kind of the overview.
Are there, thank you very much, Brian. Are there any questions?
Seeing none.
Cliff, please go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Brian, thank you so much. And John, thank you. You've come out to other groups and you did such a better job than Brian. I'm just saying. But I do have a series of questions that one or two that may not be specific to this, but you mentioned early voting starts today. So I went to the site to say, where can I early vote? It's only here in Aurora, correct?
Correct.
Okay. It's the site would be great if there was like, you can click on that button and it would like Google map you right there. That would be a cool thing. You mentioned that everybody received in the mail their voter cards, as did two of my children that no longer live in Illinois. What is the process for those people? Or do they get to vote in Texas, Florida, and Illinois?
Well, we put out a press release. We've tried to inform the public. If we don't know that they moved, obviously if the person has passed away in King County, we know because we have the death certificate and they're removed. But if someone moves and we don't know, it's incumbent on the person who receives that to send it back to us. Because we have first class postage on there, so it does get returned. We ask that you write, so-and-so no longer resides here, and sends it back to us. Then we know that the person doesn't live there.
You think mom and dad can do that for kids that have moved?
Yes.
Can we do it for seniors that have moved?
You're informing us, you know what's going on.
Okay.
It's obviously best if the voter tells us, but if the voter hasn't told us, we don't know otherwise. If the voter is registered in another state, that's part of the collective to let us know, we know, but
perfect.
There are some things that go through that we rely on you.
Okay. On the IMB bar, it's like we backed up the truck to answer my specific question that I've asked of John as well. On the IMB code, is that giving us the data when the item was sent? It's not giving us the data of when it was returned.
No, we know when it was sent because our system logs when the ballot was created.
Correct.
So we know that. The IMB will tell us, okay, we'll use the example again. It goes from here, it's going to go to the Geneva post office. So the IMB is going to tell us when it hits that post office.
Let me be specific. Voting has ended. You have 10 days to get it in. 14 days. How do you know when that was sent in?
Because we're going to know when it hits that first post office.
The IMB codes are read at the post office.
So it's going to leave if I postmark, if I'm dropping it at the post office on election day, I'm going to go to the Aurora post office, or I'm going to go to somewhere else, whatever.
Wonderful. Gilbert's post office.
Okay, I'm going to go to the Gilbert's post office.
Okay.
And when it's processed there, that IMB is going to be logged, and we're going to know when it hit that post office.
So it's like a return date stamp on there. And
Yes.
that was not available in years past, but is now.
Yes.
Okay. Because again, my complaint, my issue, my concern has always been, it seems like in those 14 days, that's a whole lot of time to get something from West Dundee to Geneva. Voting was meant to stop on such and such date.
Construction traffic.
Yeah, if all of a sudden those things are still lingering in 14 days later, you didn't end. And that's opens a different debate on, well, are you saying my vote shouldn't be cast? No, I'm saying your vote should have been cast by the deadline it was expected to be. Yeah,
We follow what the legislature says in the election code. That was what it said. This was another safeguard that we can do to help verify that question that you had. So
I'm sorry, please use the microphone.
But if it's allowed to be mailed up to 14 days later,
No,
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 it
no.
or
has
it
to be
has to be
post-
received within
Received
14
14 days later, postmarked by election day.
So if you had 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 that came in, you could challenge those and say, no, you didn't, because that barcode thingy is on there now. The IBIMB code that wasn't there in years past.
Correct. Technology is catching up.
Woo! Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Ryan, there we go. In some states, they have restrictions on who can actually mail or post or bring a vote by mail ballot to the election site, or post it in the mail. And it's kind of fondly called by some people ballot harvesting. Can you explain how that works here in Illinois? Because I believe that is not the case. So if I have a sick parent, I can get their vote by mail ballot and post it in the mail for them.
Good morning, Raymond.
Good morning. So in Illinois, so someone can bring in someone else's ballot, but we have an affidavit that the state is required. So the person that belongs to that ballot has to sign it, and the person who's bringing it, and they're signing an affidavit that that's the person they allowed. But a person like yourself, you can just bring it in. But in the post office, I mean,
So Cliff can take his grandmother's vote by mail ballot, say, thank you, Mrs. whomever, or Susan, and bring it to the mailbox and put it in without him breaking a law.
yeah, in the post office, I mean, but if you're bringing it to our office in person, you have to sign that affidavit.
But Cliff would never do that.
Why not? Don't you want to help your
Yeah.
grandmother out?
You,
Help your grandmother.
any other questions? Yes, sir.
Brown speaking. I don't have a question. I just want to say that this was a great presentation. And Mr. Chair, I hope maybe you can get Kane County Connects to post this video on there for the public to see, and maybe even get our public information officer to put a press release out that the clerk's office gave this presentation to the committee today, and that the video is available by clicking this link. I
Great
think it'd be-
suggestion. And in addition to that, the clerk's office is also available to make this presentation to organizations. So if an organization would like to have the presentation, I know one is scheduled for the end of this month. I'm not sure what others might be scheduled, but if you were a Kiwanis or a Lions or, League of Women Voters or whatever it is group that would have interest in this, they would be happy to entertain the opportunity to put this presentation on for your group.
It's good.
Copy, please.
Mr. Copey.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The phone blinked out there for a minute. I don't know if you covered this or not, but in regards to the provisional ballots, I understand that there were provisional ballots cast, but they weren't counted, and 0 provisional ballots counted. And you've reflected and cited state statutes in regards to the operations. I believe that is a legal standard to provide provisional ballots. Then the other question was, oh my, got the other question. At what point is a ballot rejected? And there's been some wild accusation that there's been a 0 rejection rate in regards to, I believe, the mail-in ballots in particular. And whereas some counties are showing a rejection rate 4, 5, 6% across the state, and typically across the nation, that for states that offer mail ballots, whereas Kane County experienced 0. So we have 2 very, very fundamental questions, and these are not wild accusations. This is fact, and this is the this is the impetus of why the people have come to the meetings in arms. And my job to ask those questions, and I'm asking them again now. And has there been reparation on those issues? And a reason why it is extremely critical question is that in the past elections, so there's been very close county board races that could have been influenced by the rejection rate one and the other question. So thank you very much.
May I
Go ahead.
summarize your questions? One, you wanted to know about provisional ballots, which was not covered on this presentation, but the question associated with the process of provisional ballots. And second is you wanted to know the rejection process for what kind of ballots? Or ballots under what condition? I didn't understand.
Yes, that's a close summarization. In particular, why were there 0 rejection rate and why was there no provisional ballots counted when I know that they were cast?
Okay.
I guess if you're talking about rejection of vote by mail ballot, there were 164 that were rejected, meaning that they came through and they weren't counted.
Mhm.
So that's a non-zero number. And I mean, I don't know.
Percentage.
Rejection would be the vote by mail ones. And then regarding a provisional.
And when they're rejected, the voter is contacted, correct?
We went through the curing process. Like we said, if there's no signature or if a signature doesn't match or whatever it is, the voter is contacted. Of that number, the 164 either didn't come to cure it or couldn't provide identification to cure it.
Then your other question was about provisional ballots and has been previously explained, and I'm going to try to answer this one. Okay. Provisional ballots really didn't happen in Kane County because you have the capability of same-day registration. And you can do same-day registration at the voting site, okay, on election day. So therefore, the individual does not have to come into Geneva to cast a provisional ballot. So that's why in Kane County, there were no provisional ballots cast. Am I correct in that?
Correct.
Okay.
So that the
Chairman,
voter
if
has
I
the
could-
option, if you're not in the voter rolls and you want to vote, you could either do a provisional, then have to come to the clerk's office, make a trip, bring your ID, do that, or present your ID, change your registration, or register and vote right then and there. The ballot's counted, it's cast, versus a temporary ballot where you have to come and prove your identification when you already have it with you. It's the voter's choice. If the voter chooses to do a provisional, it's up to the voter. Voters in Kane County over the years have taken advantage of the same-day registration option to actually cast a ballot rather than casting a provisional.
Did that answer your question, Mr. Copey?
Somewhat. All due respect, but your narrative of my question is a little bit different than what the point that I'm trying to make is that the rejection rate is a rate across the entire county of how many votes there were. And when you say there were 164 votes rejected, that's for all practical purposes, that is a 0 rejection rate comparatively speaking. But let's not call it 0. Let's call it 0.01, 0.2, whatever the number is. It's essentially 0, and it is cause for consternation. And so I'm just saying it wasn't spoken, and it is the core of the issue of the consternation throughout the county. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Ms. Gumbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just speaking to Mr. Copey's concern, I just trying to understand it. the suggestion that there's a zero rejection rate does not, in my opinion, include the, when it's rejected, it's sent back to the voter to correct or cure. So I think the statement that a ballot is rejected outright and can affect some things, maybe I'm getting in the Tom Copy mode here, but I'm not saying it properly. Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what you're trying to say. But I would argue that the rejection is initial, but then it's cured. So it's corrected or has the ability to be corrected. Am I confusing that with you, Mr. Copy?
I don't know exactly at what point a particular ballot is considered rejected. Okay, I'll be honest with you. But the fact is that other counties experience a much higher and potentially influential rate of ballots rejected that will sway elections. And now, whether or not those 160 were rejected on ballots that were corrected, if all the other ballots were corrected, then I would have to not direct the question to our county clerk, and perhaps his operation is nearly 100% accurate. So that's the issue we're dealing with, is how is it that all the other counties across the state experience a rejection rate, and how you qualify that rejection is I don't know exactly. Okay, and I apologize, I don't know that exactly.
Thank you. Wait,
No, thank you for that, Mr. Copey. I just wanted to wrap my mind around that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
we appreciate the comments, but one of the things that I do is I brag about Kane County. When you look at some of the statistics, earlier in the presentation, it said that the primary voting was accomplished and released by 7:15, 15 minutes after the polls closed. The majority of the numbers were available and online. I think that's phenomenal when you look at counties near us that took a day or two in order to come up with a good count. So I think we're in great shape. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Let's see, the agenda. Goodness, any other business? Okay. Does anybody want to go into executive session? Okay, nobody wants to do that. May I have a unanimous motion to replace the reports on file?
So moved.
So moved. Okay. In honor of Mr. Kenyon, may I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved by Leonard.
Second?
Brown will second.